Sure. Just allow me about 30 seconds, and then I will post the
Yeah.
YouTube address on Facebook and Twitter. Yeah.
Yeah.
Posted it on Facebook, and I'll do that on Twitter, and then we are on.
Okay.
Okay, we're on Swagato. Good evening. If you're in India, I am Zani, and I'm hosting this FORSEA dialogue on democratic struggles across Asia. And India obviously is one of the civilizational giants that is now being confronted with multiple crises. First is the pandemic that's on the very sharp rise with 25 million people confirmed cases. That there are cases that are not confirmed because testing is not done. And also government statistics can be less than reliable, and statistics can be fixed. And also there's another crisis. The ruling BJP party, a Hindu fundamentalist party of Prime Minister Modi, was dealt a resounding electoral defeat in West Bengal, where our distinguished guest today came from. And then, last but not least, the 5 months old or almost 6 months old nationwide farmers' protest against Modi's, essentially privatization policies, land grab, and the corporatization of Indian agriculture. And my guest today is probably one of the most qualified the scholars of India who can, shed light on these three fundamental crises that are confronting Indian society today. I have known Dr. Swagato Saga when he was doing his doctorate at the University of Oxford, and he was or remained the founding faculty member of Jindal School of Government and Public Policy, and he served as associate dean of that school. The Jindal is a private initiative outside of New Delhi, and one of the very reputable educational institutions. And I'm extremely happy to see my old friends on the on Zoom, and also I'm very excited to learn about. Not excited to learn about the crises, but I'm excited to hear Swagato's thought. So Swagato, tell us the pandemic that has made global headlines. And obviously, you live in New Delhi, and we have like lots of friends, and many of us are worried. And also, like my other Indian friends say, they have lost a lot of friends, and then they are. So tell us about that, and the beyond the media coverage of the pandemic.
Yeah. Thank you, Zani, for inviting me to the show. Yes, it's something which is unexpected in a way, because we had the experience of the first wave, which started right around this time last year, April, May. That time the headline news was the exodus of the migrant laborers from northern India and western India, mostly to the eastern India. they went on their foot, and that was the headline news. And we didn't, there was a panic about the new virus, how it has to be treated. Doctors didn't know what to do exactly. So most of the time, the treatment that they followed was a common flu. There was a crisis of hospital beds. And right after that, it went on. Though the forecasters had predicted a large number of people getting infected and dying, none of that happened. And that created, by January, February, when the curve started not only flattening but going down, that created some sense of relief in the government, and they became complacent because they thought that since the actual number did not match the forecast, so therefore it was over-exaggerated, and India has escaped. So there won't be any such. The second pandemic, when the forecast was made that there could be a second wave, at that time the government didn't take it seriously. So what happened in this, about this second wave, is that by the middle of March, all of a sudden it started surging, first in the western state of Maharashtra, and then Kerala, and then when it came to Delhi, and because all the national media is located, the headquarters there, so obviously it gets more attention. And it rose, the numbers rose very, very rapidly. The surge happened in a very short period of time. And that caught the government unawares. The Prime Minister and most of his cabinet members, various chief ministers of the same party, were busy in election campaign in Eastern India and in Southern India. And as a result, what happened is that there wasn't both an public outcry about that they're not being in charge of it, of this, managing the situation. And obviously, what we have seen here is a spectacular problem, because you wouldn't find this kind of problem unless it's a war situation where both the government fails as well as the market fails. So that created this condition where hospital beds were not enough. For the first time, we had the crisis of medical grade oxygen in the country. Hospital beds will fall short, we knew, but the oxygen crisis, that was unexpected. Because there is no particular cure, so there's a lot of experimental medicines which have been floated. Thus, again, it's not available in the market. A panic has been created. People have been running around for those medicines. And there has been what we in India call the black marketing, that basically you pay a much higher price. Now, in that, what the government could have done, and that's precisely the problem, that why the government did not take it seriously, is, and that's why I said it's a government failure or a governance failure, because government could have started the vaccination program in a better way and with a wider coverage. Government did none of that. Now we know that government had placed very little order for the vaccine. And from that, they also started doing what is known as the vaccine diplomacy. And they did that because they wanted to compete with China. And they exported and gave for free vaccine to various countries. Oxygen grade, medical grade oxygen was also sold to exported to various countries. So what happened that we did not have a very good vaccination program even for the 45 plus, which the government targeted. That group was not done. We have seen the countries where they did a good vaccination program. They are still holding up. But in India, that's completely was in shambles. Right now, government has opened it for the 18 years old plus and anybody else above that. And again, there is a short supply of vaccine. Now, you cannot. So the lesson, what we have here is when you are dealing with a pandemic, you need a state capacity of ramping up production of vaccine, of medicine, and more importantly, medical facilities. Without that, you cannot handle. You cannot prevent infection. In the globalized world, this is a global business. This virus is going to travel around the country, around the world. And you cannot stop people from flying or traveling. You cannot stop people from moving around within a country. So there will be those, otherwise the economy itself is structured in that pattern. So the virus, not only goods and people are going to, and money is going to move around, but now we have viruses which are also globalized, so to speak. And they're getting muted. The mutation is happening in one country and that then travels to the other country. And so what is required is a governance structure, both at the, I think, national level and international level. And I think WHO, I don't know, it seems to be missing in action largely. So is our both national and federal state governments. So together we have a very deadly concoction, so to speak. Sorry for using this metaphor, but that's what it is. And as a result, people are left to themselves. They are running from pillar to post. Social media has become the place where people are exchanging information. But these are also information which are not always verified. So you will be spending more time in scouting for right information and then to find a lead and then be able to get it. So again, you don't find any kind of government structure coming in very quickly to fill up this space, because social media is more anarchic space. There are a lot of agents who are floating, you don't know who they are. And obviously there is all this philanthropic, the social engagement, all of that is good. But that's not the solution. That's not is going to bring any systematic.
Yeah, forgive me for jumping in, because one of your specialties is state-society relations, right? And so you touch on both the governance, which is the domain of the state, and then you touch on the social media, philanthropic organizations, right? And so the numbers are quite staggering, right? Because you talk about like vaccination and program failure. The target was like 40-50%, of Indians, 1.4 billion people to be vaccinated. I mean, I don't think anyone outside India can really fully understand or appreciate the volume of the population there, right? But the statistics shows that only less than 11% of the entire 1.4 billion have received their first jab, the first dose, and then less than 3% has received the two, I guess, the double dose or the complete dose. Yeah. But this contrasts very sharply with the fact that India is one of the largest vaccines producers, right? I mean, you are in partnership with the British, the Americans, and other manufacturers, right? And a very well-known scientific, industry there for vaccine. And so, tell us more about the nature of the Indian political leadership, and then. Tell us a bit about the physical infrastructure and the human infrastructure that make up the public health system. Both, I suppose, like health system, both private sector and public sector.
I think the problem with India is that the heart of the problem is India spends very little on public health. It started with 1.15%. Now it has gone up to 1.8%, and that's not enough. And the government is missing both at the primary health, which is at the grassroots level, at the village level. Most of the tertiary sector, you have the private sector is there in the tertiary sector, and then there's a missing middle. And this kind of hybrid structure operates when, it's a normal time, you don't have many of this. But the moment you get this kind of a situation where you need an existing, either an existing structure in which you can base, but that would be infrastructure. You can increase the hospital beds. But the problem is, where are you going to get the doctors and the most important, the nurses, the quote unquote, the ward boys and people who are going to help? That requires a human resource, and that you can get that human resource if there are investment in the medical education. And that's something, again, India has not planned. India has one of the world's, the smallest number in the per capita availability of doctor and nurses. So there is a structural problem, and that structural problem is showing up. And it's almost impossible to see how a large country like this, with the diverse population groups, and one expects a diverse, it's a half of the population has a lives not exactly under the below the poverty line, but their economic situation is not very good. So their nutritional intake is not very good. They work very hard from a very young age. So the body, physiologically, they are weak. So these people are vulnerable. You are dealing with an extremely large, almost like 600 million people who will be vulnerable. Then also, on the other hand, because the life expectancy is going up, so you also have a large number of senior citizens. So how are you going to plan all of this? And what you see here is precisely, as I said, governance failure. And within that, you have both this fiscal dimension to it, that the allocation is not very high, and that doesn't therefore support or build up any kind of robust structure. And you also have the problem of people themselves spending a lot of money out of their pocket, because and the availability, therefore, the quality will vary. So it depends on how much money you can spend and what kind of medical service you can get. But what we have seen in this particular crisis is that even money is not going to get you, or your social contacts are not going to get you a hospital bed or an oxygen or any of the medicines when you are in crisis. And I think that has created a certain kind of panic. And the trust deficit right now on the government, whether the central government mostly, but even the state governments, I think it is at the lowest moment. I haven't seen anywhere where people are so dissatisfied with the government. So that way, I think all of these things then tie up in a, it's not simply a medical crisis that we are looking at, but we are looking also into some kind of a long-term political crisis and the structure. And we still don't know whether people will demand that there be better investment into the health infrastructure. And so that one hopes that this is going to change the way Indian politics and governance system have developed and so far operated.
Yeah, I mean, when you say governmental failure, right, and you've got a very strong Hindu fundamentalist government, under the leadership of Prime Minister Modi, and if you take an international perspective, what is so fascinating is countries that are hardest hit, in this pandemic, the global pandemic, are essentially right-wing, or countries under right-wing governments, right? Biden has been in the office for less than 5 months, 6 months. Yeah, this is he's dealing with the leftover pandemic, crisis from the Trump era, right? And then you've got the Bolsonaro and Brazil, right? And then you've got Modi, right? These are biggies, right? United States, Brazil, and India, yeah, top. Or among the most populous nations on the earth, under extremely dangerous and to a degree sort of anti-science kind of political leadership. How does the political leadership in India approach the scientific aspect of this issue, right? Because as what Donald Trump did, yeah, he did a lot of damage, yeah, trying to fix the scientific reports from the Centers for Disease Control and others, Dr. Fauci and other epidemiologists and microbiologists, but how is the quality of Mr. Modi's leadership with respect to the science?
I think it's, what we have witnessed is that very interestingly, that what you said just now about the right-wing governments, but there's a difference into the right-wing governments, because if you take the Israeli government, which is also both religious, it's the right-wing, but they had a much more technocratic approach, and they managed to vaccinate 50% of that, and they did not discredit the medical and the scientific establishments. Now, if you take them away, but rest of the people, particularly what we have witnessed in India, you see a mix of both. One is that from the government's point of view, the central government, at one section of that, they did listen to the medical advice, the scientific advice which was coming. They took it seriously. Perhaps they also took in the first wave, they took the model seriously, and then they got rattled about if these are the numbers, what they're going to do about it. But on the other hand, we have also seen a large number of party satellites, which are not mainstream. Maybe one or two ministers, but most of the other organizations within the party structure, they would peddle all kind of unscientific solutions to this problem. That you drink urine, cow urine, and you will get cured, and those sort of stuff. And then there is one company which is floated by one religious person, and they came up with some kind of an herb and an extract of that, which was supposed called coronil, which was supposed to cure the disease. And that receipt did not pass any medical test because they did not go. They were projecting it as a solution, as a cure of the virus, but they did not pass any kind of test. So they were seen as classified as a immunity boosting product. And there is no scientific basis of that. And we have seen the government ministers promoting it. So it's a very, a complex which perhaps were less interested in following the scientific advice. And then it's not simply about accepting it, but how you act on it. And that's where the governance and the state capacity comes in. And I think that's where they made a mistake. What they wanted to do, they were more interested in managing the numbers. So we saw a lot of data suppression and data management to show that a success, and that's where the leadership comes, because the leadership wants to get the credit that they have flattened the curve and they're winning the war, because everything happens within this war metaphor. And because of that, they wanted to win. And the win and in this case, it's all about numbers, and that's what they wanted more interested in. Right now, it's also going on. But the death figures that you see in India is almost 3 to 5 or even 10 times less. The total rate of infection is, again, the testing facilities are not opened up. Most of the states are tightly controlling how many people can get tested. So therefore, you don't know the real number. Again, the speculation is that would be 5 times. Now, this paradigm that you can manage a pandemic by managing the data is no longer working. It's because everybody now knows 1 or 2 members in their immediate family of their relatives who are either infected with the virus, who are suffering right now, who are looking for oxygen, or unfortunately, 1 or 2 of them many people have know someone who has died of COVID.
Yeah, yeah. Sorry, I have watched interviews with Indian cabinet ministers, and even like some of the government scientific advisors or medical advisors, and they've been challenged. When they came up with spins rather than the speaking truthfully, right? And but as you very well know, Professor Amartya Sen studied famines in different places, and the population that suffer the most, most famines are basically policy failures rather than natural phenomenon, and then so the transparency, the truthfulness of the political classes, particularly those who manage these crises, right? So when from what you're saying and what I've absorbed, through like the conventional media interviews with Indian officials, is that they are massaging the numbers, right? So but they don't massage the numbers for the sake of massaging the numbers, but they're doing it for political purpose or certain political ends, right? And then like the second wave coincided with the the elections, right? And then earlier you mentioned the confidence in the government and the political leaders is very low, if not non-existent. let's segue into the BJP's shocking defeat, right? BJP was very confident, pumping loads of money into the election machine in West Bengal, where the BJP felt that it was going to have an election tsunami like victory there to oust the incumbent Mamaji, Mamata.
Banerjee.
Yeah,
Yes.
Banerjee. And can you tell us about the dynamic, in the electoral politics, from your home state? You grew up in Kolkata,
Yes.
I believe, yeah.
Yeah, before I get into the West Bengal case on the elections, I just wanted to tell you that the media right now is playing a relatively constructive role because, the figures are so much, it's the visuals are so depressing that, the media cannot simply ignore it. So you do see, and
You mean
many
like
of
domestic Indian media, multiple languages, right?
they, it is simply very difficult to cover up. So that way, I think media is also under pressure to show what is going on because the social media is flooded with various kind of images and stories and so on. So let me now get into the West Bengal elections. And as I said that the last, because this election happened over a very long time. For the first time, I suppose the election happened over 8 phases, so almost um, about 6 weeks or 7 weeks. And but then the election campaign starts about a month or two, the high intensity and so on. So if you take that, the beginning of the campaign at the end of the election, it perfectly coincided with the second wave. And this is when the central government and the prime minister and his cabinet colleagues, they were busy campaigning. So, so there is that allegation that they did not necessarily took it the second wave seriously and paid that much of attention as they did for the election. Now, coming to this election, this was something is a small geographically or territorially a small state, but it has the highest population density in India. So it's in numbers of seats, which it sends the members of parliament, is very high, 42. So it was important for, and proportionately, it also sends the upper house members. So the ruling party, the BJP, it obviously wants to retain its in power in both the houses so that it can pass whatever rules and laws and acts that it wants to. So therefore, winning a large state was important for them so that they can consolidate their base. Also because they, as a party, want to expand. They're largely seen as the central Indian party. They want to expand in the east and they want to expand in the south. And this election was precisely about that. The 2 eastern states went into election and 2 southern states went into election. And so therefore it was very important for them. So the way this election was structured was this party from the North India, which is coming and capturing the East with all its might, right from the Prime Minister campaigning with a lot of resources, modern technologies coming in, the pollsters, the media analysts, you had the national media, which is completely under the sway of the ruling party. So you had this huge troop which arrived onto the shores. And here is one woman who is the only female woman chief minister in the whole of the country right now. And she is alone fighting them. So it had that dramatic part to that. And this was almost seen as a quasi-war between that. On her part, the incumbent, who comes from, one might say, populist party, which doesn't really have any ideological core to it, but is slightly, as any classic populist party would do, also attends to various bases, and depending on which base it is talking to, which constituency, it will have its messaging and policies around that. So this became the interface which then goes into election. And what then the hype or the way the modern election campaigns operate is that you create certain kind of a buzz, media buzz, that who is going to win. Because I think most of the journalists who land up to cover these elections, they go with this idea that to find who is winning the election. And therefore it became through that the ruling party is going to win. And because they had put a lot of resources into that, so the stakes were very high. And the result was also dramatically, nobody had predicted that it will be such an outcome.
What is the percentage you win?
Hmm?
What is the percentage?
After 294 seats in the assembly, 292 went into election, and the incumbent party won 213, and then 77 was won by the ruling and the BJP.
Well, that's 3 times, like the bigger than what the Modi's win, and because apparently as I was reading about the election, there were massive amount of money that was poured in, and about, like, I don't know, 200 trips made by different political luminaries and opinion influencers, including the Prime Minister and the Home Minister, Mr. Shah, right? And they were all very well endowed. Well, so you mentioned that Madame Banerjee's party doesn't really have a strong ideological core, right? But what about Bengali politics has always been heavily progressive, left-leaning, right? And what are the roles of the the former dominant party, the Congress, and the local Bengali leftist and intellectuals? Did they play a role in swaying the voters to favor the Madame Banerjee vis-a-vis Modi and BJP?
No, of course, this is the battle which started. We have the Bengal had a left rule for 34 years, and after that, Ms. Mamata Banerjee removed them from power. Won the election in 2011, and since then she has been in power. On the whole, Bengal had a quote-unquote progressive politics, but Bengal today is also very different from what it was earlier because of the political economy. Now, let me just give you some sense of how this political change has happened. When the left front was in power, it took almost 50 years to come to power. About 30 years to come to power, and then they remained in power for 34 years. They had a coalition of the farmers. They had the working class with them. And because in India, the social groups are important, they also had the excluded and the oppressed caste groups, as well as the Muslim. So they managed to create a coalition of all of these groups, and they remained in power. They embarked on limited land reform. They changed the dynamics and the composition of the rural Bengal. They transformed rural Bengal. But after that, what they didn't manage to do is to bring an overall economic transformation of industrialization. What we rather saw is a deindustrialization which happened. Now, when Mamata Banerjee comes, it's an important thing to notice that she comes from, though I said that she doesn't have an core ideology, but it's important to note that what she was fighting right from the beginning is a neoliberal policies which the left had started by clearing slums, evicting hawkers from the streets of Kolkata, and she was fighting all of that throughout the 90s. And then when the big push came, when the industrialization, which was neoliberal industrialization, which means that you take to dispossess and displace the farmers and take away their land and then establish, almost gift it to the industrial groups so that, and provide various kind of subsidies so that they can organize, they can set up factories and the employment and other things can go up. Now she fought that, and that's what has brought her. So when she came to power, she did not try to repeat this mistake of acquiring land, and so which also meant that she started changing her policies into more moving into the left, rather than what left was doing. The left was moving more towards the center, and she comes from more or less center right, and moves towards the left. Now, what it did, therefore, is that she developed a credibility that when the right-wing party, backed by the central government, comes on the doorstep, she became the most credible face to fight this right-wing folks, not the established left. So the civil society left, people who are not within the party formations, various intellectuals, the human rights activists, the civil rights activists, students, artists, progressive artists. So there was all the civil society actors who came behind this party, sometimes not directly telling people to vote for them, but they ran an extremely visible campaign called the No Vote to BJP. And that we saw as completely a new thing in all over India, where the civil society would come and play a role in an election, because most of the time the civil society plays a role on others' time. The elections are basically fought by the political parties. But here you had an extremely visible civil society participation. So they did manage. As I said, that you wanted to know what was the role of that. So I would say the non-party left, they did play a very important role in this. And
yeah. What about the substantial Muslim population, that you have in West Bengal? Maybe about 20-25% of the Muslim votes, among the registered voters. What was their sentiment towards Madame Banerjee? Because from what I know, she has been a strong anti-racist sort of political figure, right? She stands up for. Correct me if I'm wrong. That's the impression I get from outside looking in.
You cannot use the categories like anti-caste or anti-racist. I don't think that was there. But as I said, that she has the credibility that she can fight. She's a fighter. And when it comes to the Muslim questions, the Muslims, if you see, are concentrated in few districts. And in some districts, they were with the Congress party, and in the southern district, they were with her. And when the BJP came and they floated this idea, they're about to capture the state and form government, I think that created a panic among the Muslims. It consolidated the Muslims, and we have seen a massive number, almost 78-80% of the Muslims voting for the Ms. Mamata Banerjee's party. And that led to this, they contributed to this spectacular victory that we have seen. But on the other hand, if the Muslim consolidates, then one expects that there might be consolidation on the Hindu votes, which the right-wing party wanted, and they were trying to communally divide people. But that did not happen. And that is the message which goes out from Bengal, that is not always possible to polarize the Hindu votes, consolidate them under the banner of the ruling party in the country, the BJP. And if it is not, then it also shows a certain kind of maturity and the consciousness. Something that you mentioned about left, I wouldn't call it left so much. One might say into a more progressive might be a right word for it. But there is some consciousness that one cannot simply allow politics of hatred and division and divisiveness to take place in the society. And because who suffers are the common people. Because if the society is polarized and divided, then people are not going to have a very peaceful time. And I think that's what you saw, a resistance from the dominant majoritarian groups against this kind of politics. And so consolidation to summarize this point, that we have seen a consolidation of the minority votes, which is expected anywhere in the world that will happen. When they fear, they will consolidate. They will come together under the banner of someone who can protect them, who can fight for them. But on the majoritarian side, that did not consolidate. That remains relatively divided. They did not consolidate under the Hindu identity.
Right. So the leadership of the incumbent chief minister, Banerjee, she has been able to essentially transcend this sectarian divide, right? And then you call that the political maturation of the voters, right? So do you think that this kind of transcendental, like the racialist, bigoted type of politics can seriously dislodge BJP and Mr. Modi, because the racism and bigotry of Hindu fundamentalists has been the main instrument of manipulation, right? By the existing the BJP. How threatened they will be, as the direct result of the West Bengal's defeat. Nationally, yeah.
I think so. What is basically we are trying to understand what is the significance of this win of the regional party and the loss, the spectacular loss, because they themselves had hyped that they're going to win, and then there was a massive fall. So, what is the significance of this victory of the regional party and the loss of the national party? I think one is the politically, that what they had created is not only the ideology, as you just mentioned, of a divisive ideology, but what they have created over the years is a sense of invincibility, that they have the machinery, they have the modern machinery, they have the information technology, they can use that, they have the state agencies, and they have the enormous amount of money, almost about 70% of the money, I think, which the various business houses donate, it goes to this particular party. So they are flushed with funds, they have the media, and they have the best strategies. So what this election has shown is that none of these are, this party is not invincible. It is possible to defeat them, and defeat them also with not that much of resources. If you can mobilize people on the ground, the hard way that politics happens is not simply about floating, WhatsApp messages, but actually going and talking to people door to door, mobilizing them. The old grassroots level politics, combined with the new form of media politics. So combined to that, it's possible to defeat them. And then that perhaps gives confidence to various political parties around the country. We still don't know that whether this, what I called the non-sectarian progressive maturity that the voters have, whether it's not, India is an uneven country in that sense. You cannot expect that to follow. But what can happen is the political parties who are opposed to the BJP taking a lesson from here, that it is possible. That what they had thought, that they didn't have the confidence that, that you can mobilize people on and you can convince people. So I think that gives both a template and a mechanism for all of these parties to go out and try. Because what we are looking at is both an electoral machinery, but also a battle of ideas. Because unless you try to go out and convince people, you cannot simply influence people through the media. Because media will always be with the dominant groups. They're not going to stand up to this kind of hatred, politics of hatred. They have, and it's also not simply because they're ideologically brought up by them, but because of the particular political economy in which the media exists, they are going to, so their hands are tied so far. But it's also possible to create parallel media structure, parallel information, social media structure, plus the mobilization. I think that are the lessons for rest of the parties. Now, whether people will get convinced or not, as I said, that when we are talking about COVID, all over India, people are experiencing that the governance failure, and perhaps they would now realize that simply an identity, a majoritarian identity is not the only thing that they need, but they need a country which can come together. Because what has happened with all the social media mobilization, you see people cutting across, the Hindus helping the Muslims, Muslims helping the Hindus, the so-called lower caste helping the upper caste. And so this is the society, the way, the social endeavors that we see, the people coming out and helping each other. In a way, that is the society at its best. That is the society. Perhaps that helps us to transcend this this divisiveness, that
Right.
the poison of divisiveness that we have seen. But
So-
what will happen is difficult to predict. Yes, human beings are unpredictable. But therefore, I'm going to stress on the political parties. The responsibility is on them to go
Right.
out and do the better, the real
Yeah.
better. Not just
So this is a case of where the machine, right, the machine, that well oiled and well managed, was crushed by little people on the streets and in communities, right? And but this is only the second issue that might have, or that must have been shaking Mr. Modi and BJP's confidence, right? Because there's another one that you've got, the 600 million farmers, of the protesters that represent the interest of 600 million agricultural sector. I mean, this is also one of your expertise areas, right? Rural and agrarian transformation. There have been protests since November by Indian farmers, triggered by Mr. Modi's attempt, basically to empower corporate and private sector, against the interest of small family farms, medium-sized farms, right? So India still is has a huge agrarian sector, right? And tell us what the grievances of the protesters, and how far they have come in terms of getting their voices heard and taken seriously by, I think, like the Supreme Court has a couple of suits filed on behalf of the protesting farmers. Tell us about the status of the 5 months or 6 months old protest.
Yeah. No, before we get into the protest and what is happening there, let us see the context in which this protest is happening. These protests are happening against which was presented as a farm bills, as they're called, and then later on they were enacted by the parliament. So these are acts now. So they have a very long name, but I'm just going to tell you the 4 issues that these 3 farm acts do. So the number 1 is that India, the way the federal structure operates, which means the central and the state governments, agriculture is in the state government's handle. The central government can also look into the production and distribution of agricultural goods. So that allowed them the footstep into this agrarian politics. So what they did is that they brought one law which will deregulate, which will take power from the state governments, because all the state governments have their own laws, so you don't have one single agricultural market. So there's one act which is trying to create that, which is trying to bypass the state governments and the markets that they have and create one nation market, one national market. The second problem is that of contract farming, that if the corporates want to direct the farmers to produce certain kind of crops, how are they going to do it? Because as you said, that there are a large number of farmers. So they want to enter into contract farming and dictate what the farmers are going to produce. The third problem is that India has one act known as the Essential Commodity Act, which doesn't allow any entity to hoard food grains. So they have amended that, which now allows food grains, pulses, edible oils, onions, some of these to be bought in large quantity and to be stored. So what does these three things means is that it's a liberalization of the agricultural sector in India. It's allowing the corporatization of Indian agriculture, and so that the corporate sector can come and participate. And the fear that the farmers had, that the protections that they had vis-a-vis state governments, that's going to go away. In India, we have a system where the government and the farmers union, they negotiate a particular minimum support price, which acts as a floor in the market. So, and in most of the time, that remains, that floor price becomes the price in the market. So the farmers sell their crops, the harvest, to the government agencies. Depending on, on the state, few states in the northwestern India, they will have a very elaborate structure to buy those food grains from the farmers at that minimum support price, which means that farmers get relatively good return on their investment. Now, what they fear is that this new liberalization of the agricultural market, all of these protections are going to go away. There won't be any protection, even that floor price that the government now assures them, that will go away. So which means that they will be exposed to the market. And this is not a market of the small traders who are going to come and buy food grains from them, as it used to happen earlier. But what will happen is that few, both domestic and global agribusiness corporations will come, and with whom they will have to fight. Now, within these amendments that we have seen in the acts and the new acts, if the farmers have any problem with any of these corporates, they cannot go to the court. They will have to go to the local bureaucrat to resolve their problems. And these bureaucrats, the fear that the farmers have, that these bureaucrats can be bought by the corporates, they can be bribed, and they will never get any justice. So in all ways, all the roads that they have might get blocked. And that's why the farmers realize that if they don't resist, then gradually what is going to happen is that they will not only start be dictated by the corporates about what to grow, how to grow, and what price they're going to get, but gradually they will have to exit agriculture, which also means that gradually they will either have to sell off their land or to lease out the land to the corporate. There is another act which allows this leasing of land to take place. So that's why I think you see this tremendous mobilization, almost like an existential crisis in the farming communities, which has brought out all of them on the streets for this, not only 6-7 months, this is continuing. We have never seen such a vigorous, intensified movement, particularly in the Northwest India. And this is the background in which this is happening.
Yeah, as you know, like, one of our mutual good friends, Professor Pritam Singh, has written extensively on this subject. And I was just reading some of his pieces, and he identified 3 major actors that have formed, practically a coalition to oppose what you call corporatization of Indian agriculture, right? At the expense of farmers. And also this also, as you pointed out, is seen as an anti-federalist power grab from the center, right? So you've got state governments that, coalescing with the farmers. And then you've got political parties that do not want the dominant, players to come in and overwhelm them or overpower them. And then you've got the international dimension, because the measures are basically trying to make Indian agriculture exploitable, attractive to international investors, corporations like Monsanto and others, right? And so that's why, like, we see this unprecedented the opposition nationwide against this, right? So my last question, so where is India heading? Now with the triple major crises confronting Modi government, right? And because India is very, very important for world politics, and particularly politics in Asia, right? Particularly Asia, where there is a massive democratic regression. Yeah, the deficit of support for democratic movements. And then, say, for instance, I'm from Burma. We will always look to India as an inspiration, support, solidarity. As compared with totalitarian China, or like a toothless Association of Southeast Asian Nations. And so if India rises again as a beacon of progressivism and democratization, but we all benefit. All of us in Asia that want to see our region progressive, democratic, and respectful of rights. So where do you think it's going in, let's just say, 2 or 3 minutes? And so then we'll that's your final word.
I think what is happening is that you see that, again, going back to Professor Singh's point of federalism, that the states are flexing muscle. So they have found, because the central government is cornered, so they have found new confidence. So they are flexing their muscles. And obviously that is going to have some repercussions. Hopefully they will all band together and put pressure on the central government. So we might see a reworking of the central state relationship. Right now, we have a consolidation of power at the center. And these farm laws are also about the same thing. As Professor Singh is absolutely right, that it is about centralization of power in India. So we might see some change within that. Politically, we don't know. It's too early to say. But there is a question of legitimization. And perhaps what we have seen is a gradual delegitimization of the present regime. Now, India has a first past the poll systems. So within that, you can win an election and form government with a relatively less percentage of votes. So 35 to 40% of the vote can bring you into the power. The opposition party at the national level, that's the Congress, is at its weakest, tragically. So what means that you have one strong national party, which is the BJP, and then you have a lot of these regional parties. So will the regional parties come together and be able to float a political forum? Will that be accepted to the people? We don't know. But definitely some kind of political rebalancing is happening. The asymmetry which had been created in terms of power, I see a change in that. Now, whether that's going to bring a change completely, the present government will be defeated in the 2024 election and a new regime is going to come, it's very difficult to predict at this point in time.
Yeah, but you would say that India is definitely in the process of both ideological and political transformation, right? Like judging from these events.
Not a change or a transformation, but perhaps a renewal. That we are seeing a confidence, because over the last 5 to 10 years, what had happened is that any kind of progressive ideas have taken a backseat. They were not confident. They seemed to look like a small group of elite who harbors those progressive politics. Now that the West Bengal election, the farmers movement, and before that, there was this Anti-Citizenship Act, Amendment Act movement. All of that has brought a new kind of confidence. It has reinvigorated the very idea of mobilization. I am stressing that fact. Unless you mobilize people on the ground, you are not going to simply sit and watch. You cannot get the dividend from somebody's disadvantage. If the present central government is cornered, that doesn't necessarily translate into a dividend for the opposition parties. They need to do their own work. They need to get their acts together. And so that's why I'm saying that it's uncertain, but the possibilities are there.
Well, that's a very hopeful note to end on. And many of us who love India as a civilization, despite all its faults, we will be rooting for actual transformation. And we'll talk. And then you've been listening to Professor Dr. Swagato Saka, and an old friend of mine, and it's been extremely enlightening. Thank you so much for taking to explain your thoughts. Yeah. So we'll see you again. Hopefully post-pandemic New Delhi.
Yes,
Yeah.
of course. Yeah.
Yes.